But listen, that doesn't have to be our story. And the reason it doesn't have to be our story is because God in His mercy warns us. God in His mercy takes the time to give us these examples. You know, write this down. Grumbling, murmuring, and complaining. At their root. Why were they grumbling? Why were they complaining? Why were they murmuring? Well, we read the story and we see that there were certain emotions that they were going through. Grumbling, murmuring, and complaining at their root are, number one, fear. We grumble because we fear. We're afraid. Number two, they grumbled, they murmured, they complained because grumbling, murmuring, and complaining at their root are, number two, mistrust. They mistrusted the Lord. They said, the Lord brought us out of Egypt only to let us die here. How many of you know God has a plan for your life? But we've got to trust God's plan even when we can't figure out what's happening, even when we don't agree with what's going on. But we murmur because we mistrust the Lord. And number three, grumbling, murmuring, and complaining at their root is doubt. They doubted the Lord. The Lord said, listen, I'm going to take you out of Egypt and I'm going to take you to the promised land. If God has promised a better life, He's going to give us a better life. If God has promised that He's going to heal our body, He's going to heal our body. If God has promised that He's going to meet our needs, He's going to meet our needs. And we need to trust Him. Now, how many of you, like me, at times battle with fear, mistrust, and doubt? I'll raise both my hands. Okay? But how many of you know that God always has an antidote? How many of you know God always has a solution, a remedy? You watch these spy movies and they inject someone with something and they say, you got to do this and you got to do that. My daughter and I have a show that we like to watch called Burn Notice. And it's about spies. And they always inject the spy and they say, we need you to do this mission, and if you do it, we'll give you the antidote so that you don't die. There's an antidote for fear. There's an antidote for mistrust, and there's an antidote for doubt, and it is called worship. When we worship the Lord, fear flees. When we worship the Lord, mistrust and doubt flee. Why? Because we take the focus off of, listen, the situation and what we cannot do, and the focus is placed on God and what He can do. Worship is the antidote to fear, mistrust, and doubt. Do I have a witness here this morning? And they say in verse 4, Numbers chapter 14, let's choose another leader to take us. Listen, this is the slave mentality that they have. It's not worth the fight. This isn't working out. So, not let's get another leader to take us to the promised land because Moses, we don't like the way Moses is doing it. Let's get another leader to take us back to Egypt. Because that's what we know. That's what we're comfortable with. We don't have to fight. We don't have to trust. We don't have to have faith. We don't have to hope. It may not be much, but it's ours. The chains are ours. The hard work, it's ours. Let's get a leader and take us back to Egypt. And so they start talking bad about Moses, and they start looking for a replacement for Moses. How many of you know that we cannot replace God's choice for us? God has made choices for us. God has lined up the best for us. God has lined up situations. God has lined up trials. God has lined up blessing. God has lined up... Tabitha taught us a song today, and it says, only you satisfy. God has chosen a life of satisfaction for you and for me, and we cannot replace God's choice for us. And if we try to, we're going to mess everything up. If we try to, we're going to mess everything up. Is anybody with me this morning? And so, well, what if I have, okay, something that I don't agree with. How many of you know you're never going to find the perfect church? I remember my dad used to say this all the time. You're never going to find the perfect church. And if you do, when you get there, it's not going to be perfect anymore. That's what my dad always used to say. But you know, sometimes people, you know, have legitimate complaints. Let me tell you something. They started talking bad about Moses. They started talking bad about Aaron. They started saying we need to replace these guys. Let me tell you, be careful what you say with your mouth. Be careful what you think with your mind. And be careful what you feel with your heart. About your pastor, about your pastoral staff, about the elders, about the leadership of this church, and about the church itself. Be careful. But what if I have a legitimate complaint? Let's talk about airing out legitimate complaints for a couple of minutes. Okay? If you have a legitimate complaint, let me tell you 3 things you need to do with those legitimate complaints. Number 1, in reference to your pastor or in reference to anyone else, the first thing you need to do is pray. That's the first thing you need to do. And let me tell you what you need to pray for. You need to go before the Lord and say, Lord, change that person or change me. Because one of us is wrong. Or maybe both of us are wrong. But Lord, whoever's wrong, show us. And how many of you know sometimes when you pray for someone, you never even have to say anything to them? Because how many of you know that just us as humans, sometimes the last person we'll listen to is the closest person to us. We have a hard time listening to people close to us for different reasons. That's another preaching. Okay? But how many of you know that no one can change someone's heart like God? God knows what to say. God knows how to say it. God knows when to say it. And the best thing you can do if you have a legitimate complaint is, number 1, pray. Are you with me this morning? Someone might say, well, you know, I'm just saying the truth. I'm just going to say the truth. Here it is. This is the truth. I want you to go with me, number 2, to Ephesians chapter 4. And you have your notes, so hopefully you're kind of getting there even before me. Ephesians chapter 4. How many of you are with me still? Let's move along. Ephesians chapter 4. Paul gives some instructions. You need to find out what these instructions are. Verse 11, he says, these are the ministries in the church. Verse 12 and 13, he says, this is the purpose of these ministries. When they do their job right, these things are going to happen. Then verse 14, he says, then, referring to 11, 12, 13, when people in church do their job right, then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men in their deceitful scheming. In other words, we're not moved by everything we hear. Verse 15, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ, into all things. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14 tells us to, number 2, speak the truth in love.